All right, so here we are again, and I added a couple of neat little features to the web skred page, and I just thought I'd show them off. So I thought I'd take you from the very top of this. So all the code for this is on my GitHub page, github.com/octata/pulp, and that'll take you to kind of the top page of the repo. And then I do have a link here that's octata.github.io/pulp/doc, which loads the wasm page. So I'll click here. And this is version 0.9.20 of the web editor. And so, as before, you can type boot to start up the thing. That's partially in place because there's some parameters that I'll talk about at some other point. I think I mentioned them in the help page, but there's a way to set the number of total oscillators, total voices available. The what I think is used in web audio for the latency, it's definitely used on one of this is compiled as a desktop app, and in the future I'll give the ability to enable or disable reading from the microphone, but by default it's not an option and it's just always on. So anyway, boot takes us here, and what I want to do is show you something that has been shown in other places, and that's being able to load wave files as oscillators. And so what I have here is apparently some open source video game sound effects that are released every year with no strings attached. Maybe the name will imply what it is. They don't ask for specific attribution, and I'm already too long-winded as it is. But I thought I'd choose some kind of interesting wave files from this. What happens is this does some of the machinery behind the scenes to get the web interface to make this available to the WASM code, and sticks it into basically wavetable slot 300. So that's available to play, and you can see it's read some stuff. This is basically some debug output that probably needs to be cleaned up at some point. But at any event, we want to associate that that loaded wave table, which is in slot 300, with voice 0. So I do voice 0, W300, and I had to set kind of a default volume level. So I think 10 is pretty good for this, and then do L1 to trigger it. And I'll just let this play. And just to be clear, that is strictly Skred just playing back a wave file as part of a voice. But there's some other things we can do, like we can tell Skred to loop that sample over and over again. So the next time I trigger it, it'll just play a loop until I'll type L0, which stops it from playing a loop. And then the thing that I've added is this little plus symbol. If I click that, we get some sliders that we can do some things with. And essentially the story here is that this is an area where you put some scode commands for Skred. In this case, it says choose voice 0. I want to set the frequency. And then these two curly brackets will substitute whatever this slider value is, and then what determines what that slider value has in it are these minimum value, maximum value, and step value. So in essence, when you do the slider, it will show up here. When I move the slider, it will send these commands to the Skred engine as it's being slid. So what you can probably notice from this area down here is that it's doing V0F and then a number. But we can't hear anything because the waveform isn't playing. So what I'll do is I'll trigger the waveform again and slide around with this and show you what it sounds like. Alright, so I did kind of default some of these so that the second line is voice 0 amplitude, then whatever's here, and I've put the values from -20 to 30. You can change these, and as soon as you change them, it makes those values available to the slider. Another kind of default value is P, which I may not have mentioned before, but this is a panning of where the voice is in the stereo field, and the values are from -1 to 1, with 0 being the center. So I'm going to turn up the volume and then do the panning, and hopefully you'll be able to hear this in the recording. So another thing I'll show off here is that I want to amplitude modulate this voice so that it kind of gives a, well, I think it's called vibrato, but I'm not a music person, so I may be speaking that incorrectly. So what I'll do is I'll say that I want to use voice 1 as a AM modulator for voice 0. And the way that I do that is to say voice 0, A says set the amplitude modulation based on a voice number, just a number, not the V. So we want this to be voice 1, and the amount that it'll affect, which I want to just make that a 1 without much explanation. Okay, now it got quiet, and that's because by default, any voice that hasn't been set explicitly has its volume level set to, I think, -90 dB, which is effectively tells the engine don't play it. So it's multiplying don't play by the voice of, or the amplitude of voice 0, so that silences it. The way that I make voice 0 actually do something, or excuse me, voice 1 do something, is to trigger it. So I do voice 1, L1 is the trigger. That's an L. It's hard to tell the difference between L and 1, which is probably a flaw on my part. And so we'll hit that, and it still doesn't do anything, and that's because the frequency is also set to 0, which is not useful. So that's why we have this. Now if I have set the frequency to something and trigger it again, what am I not doing here? So, because V1, A0, F1. Okay, yeah. So that's doing its thing. And what else am I forgetting here? We'll set the volume. Sorry you can hear that kind of effect, but we probably want to change the frequency of this to be a little bit more interesting. So I'm going to turn the volume up and change the frequency of voice 1, which is what this incantation does, and it's associated with the slider. So here we go. Okay, so do you notice that there's a sound playing here? That's because we can hear voice 1 in the audio, and I have a story for that. If I say V1, M1, that mutes that voice 1 from the audio field, but it doesn't affect it as a modulator. So now we can't hear that, and I'll turn up the volume of voice 0 again. But one thing to mention here is that in the domain of modulators, we probably want this to be what's called a low frequency oscillator, which means probably something less than 55. So I'm going to make this range from 0 to, we'll say, 30. And now I'll turn up the volume of voice 0 so we can hear that, and change this voice 1 frequency just for demonstration purposes. anyway, these are toys that I've made to play with. I have no idea if these are interesting to anybody else, but Skred and this tool are open source, MIT licensed, and I will be talking about them at the Audio Developers Conference in Tokyo on June 2nd, I believe. So if you're there, I'll be showing this off and talking to people, and maybe it'll be interesting and useful. Anyway, that's all I got for now.